Hey everyone, and welcome to the Uncorked Corner podcast, where we cover the full spread of food and beverage industry topics. My name is Bianca, PR and marketing professional by day and food and wine connoisseur by night.
And my name is Nick, an accountant with a passion for barbecue, beer, and whiskey. Today we welcome Ron and Mike from Aeronaut Brewing Company. Ron is the co-founder and chief science officer, and Mike is the brewery's technical director.
In today's episode, we learn all about how Aeronaut got to where they are now, get the inside scoop on some new drinks they are offering, and chat about the extremely creative brewery space in Somerville, Massachusetts that makes for a one-of-a-kind experience.
If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to us. With that said, let's welcome Aeronaut Brewing to the show.
All right. Well, hey guys, and welcome to the podcast. Today we have Mike and Ron from Aeronaut Brewing Company with us. Let's start by having both of you introduce yourselves and give us a bit of information on your backgrounds.
All right. So I'm Ron, and I'm a co-founder of Aeronaut Brewing. So we started the brewery about a little over 6 years ago now. There was probably another year and a half before that leading up to starting. So, we started off being home brewers. We brewed in our backyard. We had, your standard kit starting out, but then we started getting more and more crazy equipment to brew with, like 60-gallon batches, steam boilers in our backyard, and giant propane tanks and stuff like that. So that's kind of the background that I have relating to beer and how we got into brewing. I'm an engineer by training. So when we were starting out, I was a grad student at MIT, and we were working with my roommates were kind of working on brewing beer and on the side, and it started off as a hobby and kind of got out of hand. So that sort of the engineer in me is what I think is the real driver for a lot of my interest in brewing, is the process control and the variations and how you can change what you're doing and get a different result, and the infinite possibilities with beer and the different ways to control the process. So, yeah.
Howdy, I'm Mike Smith. I don't know, my title changes a lot. I think I'm currently technical brewery director, something like that. But I've been at Aeronaut for just over about 3.5 years, I'd say. Maybe just over 3.25. But I've been in craft brewing for over 20 years. I actually started homebrewing in college in the very early 90s, and kind of got into homebrewing at a really fertile time back in the very early, first big bubble of craft brewing. And I ended up getting really into the hobby, so I kind of went overboard, and I ended up working running a homebrew store down in Austin, Texas. And that eventually led, and I kind of had an aptitude for I like how science and history and beer how science and history and, microbiology and all that kind of meet in brewing. So it kind of really ticked a bunch of boxes in my mind, and I got really into home brewing. And then when I was running the brew shop, I ended up getting my foot in the door at a brew pub in Austin, Texas, the late great Waterloo Brewing Company. And so the head brewer there hired me as an assistant in '98 or something. And then from there, I moved back to Massachusetts and worked at Harpoon for 10 years. And that's where I really cut my teeth. Started as a, keg filler, and kind of worked my way up to being one of the lead brewers. I was there for 10 years, and then I went a couple other breweries. I went to Mayflower and Plymouth. Then I went and was head brewer at a startup called Back East in Connecticut. And then life moved me to New York City for a little while. And then I came back to Massachusetts, and that's when I got the job at Aeronaut, and I've been there ever since.
Nice. So you both have backgrounds in brewing pretty extensively in home brewing. What was the driving force? When did what year did you guys start making beer under that Aeronaut name and putting it out? And what was your first beer that you put out?
Sure. So Aeronaut came to be in 2014, and our opening day was June 21st, which was the first day of summer, and we kind of planned it out that way. And we had a handful of beers that were open, that were on tap that day, that opening day. I think we had 8 beers on tap. So we had kind of brewed a bunch of recipes up to that point. But I will say, if I had to say which is the official first beer, it would be, well, I guess there's 2 answers. One is A Session with Dr. Nandu, because that was the first recipe we designed. Even though it wasn't necessarily specifically the first exact beer we brewed on the commercial scale, it was probably the second or third, but they all came out at the same time. So A Session with Dr. Nandu was a session IPA. It was designed to be, very aromatic, easy to drink, kind of in the style of, the big inspirations for us were All Day IPA from Founders. And we also like this one, Renair from Aeronaut Brewery. It's out of, I think, Barcelona. And it was imported. So sometimes you'd get a good batch. Sometimes it'd be sitting too long because it comes all the way from Europe. But the batches we got that were really floral, we really liked. So those were kind of the inspirations for that. Over time, we phased that recipe out and we developed Hop Hop in a Way, which kind of supplanted that. And it's a really awesome beer. So that's part of the reason we phased out Session with Dr. Nandu. But that ultimately would give rise to A Year with Dr. Nandu, which was sort of the stronger, more West Coast IPA version of that beer. Similar kind of profile, but a different recipe. So I guess the other answer to the question is, the first beer that we literally brewed on that system that came out was probably our Hefeweizen, which we still brew every summer.
We have it on right now.
Yeah. So
Draft only.
Right. We've never done that in cans. We don't have any plans to do it in cans. But that's another, very classic kind of true to style recipe that we do.
And that's actually, recipe R001.
There you go.
But we can talk about that, not putting it in cans, because I'm a proponent of that in cans.
Yeah.
Well, with the recent worldwide pandemic, because actually we can talk about this later if you want, but a lot of beers that were not intentionally were not originally planned for us to put in cans, ended up being put in cans. A bunch of them, actually, a lot over the last 6 months. So the pandemic has shifted, drastically shifted the consumption from on-premise, which is sitting at a bar, to off-premise, which is buying something and bringing it home. So never say never.
I know I'm a big fan of the Hefeweizen style, so that'd be cool if you guys get that released. I know Bianca's been going around to breweries and everything to pick up samples, and that's whenever there's something that's draft only that I want to try. I'm like, tell them to fill up a growler. I don't care. Get it to me. I need to try it.
So other than that brew itself, what other beers do you have in your lineup right now? Do you have any that are special for the summer? Do you have a bunch that are always on your rotating drafts?
We have a lot, as Ron mentioned before, we, in this, 2020, 1920 is kind of weird. Like, the market has shifted where there are not so many flagships anymore. But we are actually in a kind of cool position where we do actually have two effective flagship beers. With the Year with Dr. Nandu, our West Coast style kind of older school IPA that Ron mentioned, and also the Hop Hop in a Way, which is a sort of, we call it a New England session IPA or a session ale. But with the way the pandemic has happened, again, as I was saying, like it's kind of shifted our production a lot. And so a lot of these pretty cool beers, one of the ones, Sister Alva, I think, is one of the cans that we sent over. Was again another one of these. It's a Belgian pale ale that was kind of a taproom favorite, but because we got shut down, the taproom got shut down as we were making that beer. We ended up putting it into cans, and it turned out rather well. And we've done a couple batches since. Another thing that the pandemic-y changes have done is that the way it's kind of stretched out our production schedule a little, and caused us to reformulate some of the schedule back end, making of the sausage, boring stuff, but production issues, which have freed up tanks for longer time. And so over the last couple of months, we've actually done a lot more lagers as opposed to ales, because we can give them more time. We have more time to let the beer age in tanks. So that's one of the things. We had a bunch of new lagers come out, and more fruit sours and kind of stuff like that.
Yeah, the fruit sours definitely seem to be the flavor of the summer. I know a lot of people are putting those out. With your mission, I was, browsing through your website, and I saw that you have 3 main pieces to your mission: brew world-class beer, amplify the voice of your community, support arts and culture. Now, obviously, the beer you guys have down. So how do the other 2 fit into the mission there?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's sort of just naturally what we've come to do, I guess. Amplifying the voice of our community, that is a big function of who we are and how our space has come to exist in Somerville, at least up till now in Somerville. Now we have a new location, but in addition to that, but the Somerville tap room is notably very large. And if you think back to 2014, when we were about to open, it was in this space that was kind of not really well known. It was down this side street, up an alleyway in a corner with a kind of small door that didn't really look like it went anywhere. And then you'd go in and you're in this very large brewing space. And what we didn't really anticipate when we first opened that we'd have the size of the audience size that we do, that we'd have the number of people showing up on the weekends that we do. And we realized that there was this big, aside from people wanting to come and have beer and hang out and all that, we think there was this big pent up demand for gathering space, community space, places where clubs could meet, meetup groups. We do programming events every night of the week, or at least we did up until fairly recently. But there were just so many different community groups, artists, all this kind of stuff that was coming out of the woodwork, coming out of our local community within a mile of our space, and they wanted to be in the space. And we realized that we could provide that space, first of all, and that the way we were kind of able to do this, like why these places don't really exist very easily in a place like Somerville, is because it's hard to find big chunks of real estate and to support them. And so the way we support it is through the sale of beer. And so effectively, the thinking is that by making and selling beer, we are able to amplify the voice of our community, right? We're kind of financing that space and allowing people to come hang out, use the space for things that they bring, right? So someone has, there's musicians, there's artists, there's bike committee groups, people who do really cool things. And we don't have to necessarily create that content. We don't have to say, here's what you should be doing, customers, right? I mean, anyone who comes into the space, they all have their own ideas about what they could be doing there and what they want to do with their free time. So we're kind of just providing the space to let people thrive in that way. And that's been kind of integrated into our mission as we've observed that happen in the first year or two. And then arts and culture particularly became a big part of that, because we would have live music 5 nights a week or something like that. We'd have big events, art events, projector party. We did one a couple times that was like all visual artists, probably had 24 visual artists. We had Curious Sound Objects is another big art show we did that was more sound-based art objects that we had on display. And then, we have rotating art exhibits at our space, and that's all also become a big feature. Music and art have been important features of all of our off-site beer gardens, as well as, community tables and things like that, where we can integrate different local organizations into all the events that we do. So that's kind of how we integrate all those things into our mission.
I think that the location, being in Somerville, I think it's an interesting, our brewer, when because I'm not one of the founders, I came in from outside. One of the things, Somerville's I think it's one of the most densely populated cities in the country, let alone Massachusetts. But it's also really very, very diverse community, which is something that, I coming in as an employee really came to appreciate. The just sort of being the center, like we're this sort of like funky neighborhood brewery, like a focal point of the neighborhood, which I really like, particularly before the pandemic, and it was really neat, like with all the, international students from Harvard coming over. We have, all this, as Ron mentioned, all this diverse music programming. And I find that, that is a real reflection of the neighborhood. One of the things I like, makes me happy is that we can actually pack the place with, 200, 300 people. I forget whatever, like 270 is what our capacity is, effectively without a real parking lot, which is really, it's like that, just the, people come to the brewery on bikes and they walk. And I think we're a pretty neat little eclectic reflection of a eclectic community that we happen to be founded in.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very cool.
And I'd say like we also integrated a lot of that now into the brand and the beers, that leave the space, the wholesale. And we've done that in a bunch of different ways. We've done beer can releases with bands. We've done a few of those. We just did one this spring. That was the Access Road.
Access Road. We're actually canning it again tomorrow.
And that, yeah, and so that was done with with a band where they had their Winnebago was their song, and they put that on the can, so you had a link to the song from the can. So that was like really cool. And then we've done that in the past too with other bands. The Lights Out was another one. And then we've done things like collaborations with Somerville Arts Council when we did the Porch Beer. And we'll do beers that are collaborative with different organizations like Mass Audubon and other groups that we think are important in our community and that we could work with to create cool beer collaborations on. So
that's been a very interesting thing with the recent developments in the world. Actually, two and beer, these are not necessarily Aeronaut centric things, but it's very cool that our industry kind of reflects the times. We did two we took part in two recent sort of amorphous international collaborations. Early on in the pandemic, we brewed a beer called All Together, which was spearheaded by the other half in New York City. It's a pale ale India Pale Ale that everyone, they came out with a basic recipe that everyone could put their little tweaks on. And, with the caveat that, certain percentage amount of the proceeds or a fixed amount or whatnot goes to organizations that were helping displaced hospitality workers from those first month or two when things were up in the air, and a wide swath of people, including our employees and a lot of our customers, are of our hospitality people. And so it allowed us to make this cool beer, be part of this collaboration, and we donated some money to I think it was called the Camberville Hospitality Fund or whatnot. And then a more recent one, another one of these big international collabs was after the George Floyd, sparked by the George Floyd protests, a brewery out of San Antonio called Wandering Souls spearheaded, it's called Black is Beautiful. And again, it was hundreds of breweries around the country did it, and then supporting, some proceeds going to support, black organizations that support Black rights. And I think we did, I forget exactly who we donated to. I think it was ACLU or something like that. And so, being so like that sort of microcosm of Somerville, Aeronaut in Somerville is kind of like, it's kind of neat to see how in this entire community, it's kind of a microcosm of what microbrewing and craft brewing can actually turn it. It's kind of this really neat little kind of movement going on that has a voice for people.
Yeah, and that's one of the beers that I know that we have here. So we'll get into that later, talking about the flavor and all of that. But speaking of community, so you share space with Carolicious Taste Encounter and Somerville Chocolate. What is that like? Do you ever partner with those organizations? What's the dynamic kind of being so close to all those other businesses?
It's cool. It's sort of by design. When we came in, we decided that we had a lot of space and we wanted to bring in different partners that are involved in food and making food related products. And there are a few different tenants we've had over the time, but right now, we have a pretty cool space. We have Taste Encounter you mentioned, and they're more on the fine dining end of the spectrum. And they do all kinds of interesting things with a range of flavors, very, very seasonal, so their menu's constantly changing. But we've done several different collaborative things with them. We've worked on a malt vinegar with them in the past. They most recently, we're working on a recipe with Schisandra berries, which is something they use a lot of in one of their palate cleansers that they give at their dinners. So it's a really interesting berry that supposedly has all the 5 flavors in it. So, salty, sweet, sour, bitter, umami, and it's kind of a cool thing. So we worked on doing a little pilot scale recipe with that berry with them. And then they've done things with other tenants, like they have a chocolate blend that they work on with Somerville Chocolate that they make for the restaurant. And we've done beers with Somerville Chocolate. Coco Sutra's one that we have worked on a recipe with Eric over there, where he'll specifically roast the beans in a certain way, and he'll give us this like the crushed nibs to put in the beer, and that's kind of made to order with us. So that's a really cool collab. And then of course Carolicious, they do all kinds of really cool programming. They have their arepas are really good, and that is our current food service at the patio. And we've worked with them more on the events side, actually. We've done some really cool collaborative events that really highlight Venezuelan culture They're Venezuelan and the food is Venezuelan. And so they've helped us bring in musicians and really just a really cool audience when we've done those events. We'll get a lot of people who are from Venezuela, but they're coming, they're living all around the area. So they're probably coming from not just Somerville, but a little further out. And we get, I don't know, those are really cool events. We did that on their grand opening last summer. We would have liked to do it as an annual event, though there are certain restrictions on live music right now. So we're trying to figure out if.
Yeah, they definitely liven the place up too.
Yeah. I mean, they're super fun.
To elaborate a little on the Somerville Chocolates collab that we do, Coco Sutra. It's really neat because we actually do, we actually use the chocolate nibs, which is like a, raw material that he makes the chocolate from. But we actually use the cocoa nibs in two different ways in the beer. We actually put a lot of nibs actually in the mash, which is where you mix the grain and extract the sugars out. So it gives like this very deep chocolate flavor. But we also use the nibs the way, analogous to the way you would use dry hops in a hoppy beer, where we're actually soaking them, adding the nibs, different nibs to the beer at the later stages of fermentation. So the nibs are actually soaking in the beer, releasing their flavor. But last year, after that, what we've done with, it was Eric's suggestion, is after we transferred the beer out of the tank, those nibs that were in there soaking in the beer, we actually gave back to Eric, and then he dried them out and ground them up and used them as inclusions in another chocolate bar. So we made like a white chocolate bar with little ground up nibs in it that had been had been marinating in this beer for a week. So it's kind of like a really neat multi-way collaboration, which is, a big advantage of having a roast, and it smells really good when he roasts nibs. It smells like brownies being made. So
I'm sure.
So that was a nice little multi-way collab.
So you guys got into events a little bit right there, and obviously with the pandemic hitting hard, events haven't gone as planned, but I was looking on your calendar and I noticed there's a lot of virtual events you guys have been putting on. You want to talk to us a little bit about some of those virtual events and what people can experience with them?
Sure, yeah. When this all happened, we shut down in March, and there was kind of a week where we were not sure what to do next, and we were kind of figuring things out, and we decided that it was important to stay engaged through this time with our community, and that we'd be back at some point, and
the show must go on.
Yeah, I mean, we had like a really good opportunity, and it started off with trivia, which we've been doing pretty much since the first year we opened. Every Tuesday night. It's almost never been canceled, maybe once or twice for one reason or another, but it's one thing that's very, very steady and reliable, and it's a kind of programming that has a lot of support and a very loyal audience. So it was important to us to keep that going in some fashion, and we thought it really worked well in a virtual setting because you have your questions, we actually make people present their questions on slides, and it's all hosted by local community member volunteers. So we don't actually put the content together, we just provide the platform. So we had to come up with a way to put that together. So it was a bit of a technical challenge because we needed to come up with a answer submission tool and the right platform. We use Zoom webinars for it, and then to promote it and do all that. So we got that going, and it was crazy. We had to have like a mission control team in the background with, two hosts, people scoring, people doing tech support, and the turnout was immense. I mean, we had, by the second week or third week, we were up to something like 900 participants in the trivia, which is really cool. It was really cool to be a part of, and I think people really appreciated having something to do, especially at that time when we were on lockdown. And it was really well received. It definitely presented a lot of challenges to like how to run it, and when you get to that many teams, it's a ton of scoring, so we had to automate some of that, and it's crazy, but that was really good. We have that's going on. It's still every Tuesday night at 8, and it still has a pretty good audience, so that's really cool. Now we have I don't want to say it wrong. I always want to call it Arts and Nails, but let me tell you what it's actually called. Oh, it is Arts and Nails. Okay. Virtual Arts and Nails. So that's, we host that, and sometimes it's hosted by Britt, who's our community events coordinator. But sometimes we have guest artists who are, painting, and you kind of follow along, and they'll give instruction. They'll talk to people who are participating. So that's another ongoing thing. And then everything else, a lot of it's like offshoots of stuff that we do. We would normally do regularly. So we have our bike talks. Those used to be monthly events. We're still doing that. And I believe there's one going on tonight. There's Skip the Small Talk is another one that we used to do at the brewery. And now that's been turned into a virtual event series. And we continue to do some other things. We're going to do monthly homebrew workshops. That's a new thing for us. We thought it worked well because everyone's at home. So that's when we have people, we have brewers who are making homebrew scale recipes that are related to beers that we might make here, and kind of showing you, well, you can actually follow along and brew along at home, ask questions. And that's been really fun, very interactive. And the audience is obviously a lot smaller for that, but it's a very, very enthusiastic audience, and they're very happy they get to participate, and you get to ask pretty technical questions from our brewers who do this for a living. I know, like when you first start home brewing, some of it's really clear, but some of it's you don't know the answers to some of the things you're doing or why you're doing certain things. So that's been really cool, and we get to follow along, do bottling, and kind of see what the product is at the end. With there'll be another session where they're following up with bottling and things like that. So I think there's another one of those coming up soon for a beer that was recently brewed, and then we're already talking about planning the next one for the fall. Probably going to be a pumpkin or pumpkin-like ale, and that's a fun one to do at home because you can do a lot of variations on that. So yeah,
and it means we don't have to make one at the brewery.
maybe. So yeah, there's all kinds of stuff like that we've been working on, and we were kind of originally thinking once we reopen that we'd start transitioning to in-person events, but for a number of reasons it's not really possible. And so we're still sticking with the virtual events for now, but we're starting to think about how we can make that transition and maybe do something where we'll have maybe virtual or streaming events, but maybe they're also being projected at the brewery in person eventually when we're allowed to do that.
Yeah, that's awesome that you've been able to adapt that way, and they look like really interesting events. I'll have to attend one myself. Nothing's better than drinking and doing art, so.
Yeah.
We saw that back in July, you decided to take a chance on hard seltzer. That's, of course, a really popular summer beverage now, and I think started probably last year. What inspired this move, and how has that been for you? I know it's one of your gluten-free options, which is always a great thing to have. A lot of people, are gluten intolerant. So that'd be great to hear a little bit about.
Yeah. Let's see. I mean, I would say I was a big driver of the seltzer myself. I am a big fan of hard seltzer. I was drinking a lot of White Claw last summer. I'm not ashamed, but I think there's a lot of people who like it. I've been fairly skeptical of a lot of like malt.
You lost your audio there, Ron.
We lost your
There
audio
you are.
for a minute. You're back.
Oh, do you hear it? I was like fairly skeptical of a lot of these, like a lot of like beer alternative malt beverage types, your Zimas and your Smirnoff ices, and but this, I think it fills a certain market need. One is certainly like a lower calorie option, and it's about as low calorie as it can get because the calories are all in the alcohol. So that's an interesting one, but it's not bad to drink. It's refreshing, and it's gluten free is the other big thing, and that there's an increasing demand for that kind of thing. So as a brewery, we're sort of limited in what we can do for alternatives. We can't do cider unless we get a winery license. But seltzer can be made as a brewery because you're using just sugar or malt related sugars to ferment, and that counts as beer or a malt beverage. So we thought, why not give it a try? So we've taken a few stabs at it. What we put out, I guess like a month ago, was the result of a bunch of preliminary work we did in the lab, where we were testing out a bunch of different recipes, things like pH adjustments, a whole series of different yeast strains that we thought might be better or worse for this, because you really want a very clean flavor. So some yeasts do better than others in that. Some yeasts do better than others. You don't have a very like yeast nourishing environment because it's just pretty much sugar water that you're fermenting. So you have to worry about that. And then we finally had something that we thought was a decent starting point, and we decided to scale it to the pilot scale. I still think there's a lot of work to be done on that, and I'd like to scale it up, and I have a lot of ideas on how we can do that. But for now, it's still in the testing phase.
Yeah, and about half of it was consumed by people working.
Yeah.
Big hit amongst the staff.
Now,
Too refreshing.
let's get into the new cannery you have opening up in Everett. So obviously over there, that fermentation district going to be in crowded territory with a lot of other people there. What can people expect to experience that cannery? Are you guys going to have a tap room there? Is it just going to be for the commercial brewing side?
For now, it's just for commercial brewing. The goal originally was to put in another brewery in a tap room. The timing obviously was a little tricky on this one. We closed in February, shutdown was in March, and we, over time, once we kind of had an understanding of what was happening with the market and where people were buying their beer, we kind of figured out a way to try to get this place launched, at least for just brewing. And so right now the main goal is to get more cans out there. There is a big demand for cans right now in general, but we've also just seen a demand surge for our cans, and we've scaled up cans because we stopped making kegs for the last several months for the most part. And all those cans have been sold. So we're looking for ways to make more cans. So this is really important for us. Particularly.
Yeah, so currently, I'm going to interrupt for this. So currently, the space that we have in Somerville is we are effectively maxed out. We made almost exactly 4,000 barrels of beer there over the last 2+ years, because we've quite literally there's not enough time. We're every moment that we can be brewing, we are brewing. And using all the time we have and all of the fermentation space we have. And up until the pandemic started and the lockdown, is we basically would do, not 50-50, but pretty close. We were alternating cans. We'd have a mobile canner come in 1 week, and then we would do the very draft heavy packaging the week after. And once the shutdown happened, we went to every week canning. And so but at a certain point, we don't have enough space to own our own canning line, and that's something that the Everett space is really built around is for canning.
But
So,
there is
sorry.
still, there is still a tap room there that,
Yeah.
Existed in the previous, brewery that was there. There was a tap room, and we'd like to reopen that space to the public, but we don't have any immediate plans to do it. We're not opening in Somerville. We're not open indoors right now. We're only open in the courtyard. We don't have any immediate plans to open indoors. I don't think we don't feel that it's quite safe right now to do that. Our employees and our customers generally seem to feel that way. So we don't have any plans to open the indoors in Everett, but we do hope to get a pouring permit there so that we can do that at some point. And we have a hearing on that next week. So if that gets granted, then we have at least the option to open when we're able to. And the other thing we could do once we have that is open a patio out there, just like in the parking lot. And that might be something we try to do before it gets cold out. And that would give us sort of a second outdoor patio space that would be really awesome to have right now.
Yeah, so to jump into the beers that we have here, Nick and I are trying them all, and we'll share all about the different flavors and times that we have them. But we'd love to learn more about the different tasting notes in the 4 beers that we do have. So we kind of chatted about the Black is Beautiful, kind of what it means and all about that. So why don't we start with that one and just kind of get a little insight as to what those primary flavors are.
That particular beer is, so one of the original, like I mentioned earlier, that that was a collab that we were kind of given these guidelines, and I tweaked it back a little because one of the original ideas that was given to us by the Wandering Souls was like a 10% imperial Russian kind of imperial stout. And internally we said, you know what, it's going to come out in July in cans. I don't know if we didn't necessarily want to do a imperial stout, and they gave us, we had wonderful latitude within the structure of this collab. And so I kind of turned it on. I made a oatmeal stout out of it. And one of the things that is tricky in some of the darker beers is balancing out roastiness without making it too acrid, sort of. And so in that particular beer, by making, like, we used, in order to get the dark color and the roasty flavors, you have to use roasted malts. But I intentionally chose a few varieties of the dark malts that are what we call debittered. So some of them, in one of the malts I used is called Midnight Wheat, which is it's wheat-based roasted malt. It's roasted just like all sort of stout, the malt that goes into stouts, but because it's wheat naturally does not have a husk the same way that barley does. And so a lot of the acrid flavors can come from the charred husks of the grain. So by using midnight wheat, and I used another type of dehusked barley that was roasted, cuts down on some of those tannic burned characters. So it kind of gives it more of a smoother roast flavor, and which is also balanced out by the addition of oatmeal, flaked oats that we add to the mash, which gives the beer kind of like a silky mouthfeel that balances out some of the roasty flavors. And then in addition to that, I added a little bit of touch of what's called maltodextrin, which is a malt-based sugar that is not very fermentable. So what it does is it stays, the yeast doesn't ferment it out, So it adds a little residual sweetness, and it helps fill out the mouthfeel in addition to the oats.
Well, and I think
I
we
really like
already
that beer.
touched earlier on the hop and away pretty good. So let's get into a couple of these other ones that you sent over. So why don't you take us through the Surface Wave beer that we have here?
So Surface Wave is actually an example of one of the lagers that we were talking about before, where this was a beer that internally, it started out, Mark, our brewmaster, runs a lot of the proto system. And so he's been playing around with some different pale malts. And this Surface Wave, it was, internally, it was a draft only beer that we didn't really have a name. We didn't really flesh it out marketing wise. We just called it a pale Keller beer because that's what the prototype was named that got scaled up from. But what a Keller beer is, it's not so much a style as it's a variety. Yeah, it's not so much a very distinct style, but what a Keller beer is effectively like an unfiltered lager beer, as if you were in the cellar. Keller is cellar in German, and cellar is the physical area where the beer ferments. We call it the cellar. So you have your brew house and you have the cellar. And a cellar beer is like basically what the brewers like will pull off the tanks or whatever before it's quite, it hasn't got, so it's a unfiltered sort of, straight kind of from the tanks, sort of more rustic-y type of lager, a little less refined than some of the Pilsners or whatnot. And this particular one, Mark chose originally, is a different pale malt than we generally use in most of our beers. And this particular one uses a Bohemian floor malted pale malt. It's actually sourced from Czechoslovakia. We get it from Germany, I believe. And we use the Hallertau Mittelfrüh hops. So like really, really traditional southeastern European brewing styles. And then again, this was a beer that was originally meant for kegs, for draft only, but it was in process, lagering and aging when the shutdown happened, and we switched over to cans. And so this one has a really so then that's where the Surface Wave. I don't know if you have a can in front of you. It's the artwork is really, really cool. It's one of Raul's. Raul Gonzalez III does quite a bit of our art, some of our most iconic aeronaut-y art. And he did a really great job with that one. It's like a sea monster robot guy, really cool. And so the marketing Surface Wave kind of was built around the art. But it's a very balanced, malt-driven, pale, unfiltered lager is what that one is.
Awesome. Yeah, I love the artwork on all of the cans personally. And the last one we have is the Into the Citra Galaxy, which I love the name of anyway. But this is a very vibrant can. Can you tell us a little bit more about this one? And then where, to close it out, where we can have our listeners find all of the different beers for themselves?
So the Into the Citra Galaxy is we call it, it's another session, it's a session ale. That came out of our, actually it didn't come out of the proto system. This one came out of a couple of years ago. Every year, we're doing it this year at end of September or beginning of September, come out at the end of September. We do a wet hop beer, which is, or a fresh hop beer, which is most beers, the hops that you get are actually, they're harvested and then they're dried and pelletized and stored, and then you use them throughout the year. But wet hop is literally, the hops are usually picked that morning or the night before. So, and we work with a farm called 4 Star Farms in Northfield, Massachusetts, right on the Vermont-Massachusetts border, right on the Connecticut River. It's beautiful. They're putting a brewery in right now too. but I literally like drive out there to pick up the hops, and the guys are like making the beer, and I'm like coming back with the hops. They're literally like, we're in the field that morning. And so we're somewhat in that wet hop beer, we are, beholden to nature. And 2 years ago, we had a specific time set up. We were going to do a wet hop beer with a specific type of hops and all this. And then at the last minute, at the farm, they had an issue with the crop. I think it was some sort of insect that had gone into this particular variety. So at the last minute, we had to change the beer. And Mark and another one of our brewers, Felipe, had been working on this session ale proto system. And so what we did was we used a lot of the grain that we had allocated for this wet hop beer and let them make this session pale ale. So it's actually, the style of beer is fairly similar to Hop and Away, except we use, rather than using wheat and a light base malt, we actually use a slightly darker German pale ale malt. So it's roasted slightly different, so it gives a little more of a malty character, but we still brewed it in the style of a New England IPA. So a lot of the New England IPA, it's like a session version of a New England IPA. So a lot of the New England IPAs have a lot of wheat and oats. And so they're very light in color and light in, like the malt character does not come through a lot. And what Into the Citra Galaxy does, I like the parent that, the parentheses are mine, by the way. I like that little parentheses. It's like a song, so I like that. Because we used to just call it Citra Galaxy. So what this is, it's basically a New England IPA, but lighter session style, and then with a slightly maltier note. And then we used, it's called Citra Galaxy. We used Citra, which is a darling of the craft beer, American citrusy bright hop. And then with Galaxy, which is kind of a rock star hop these days. And we have a really good supply of it. And it's an Australian hop that's known for all sorts of crazy fruit flavors. And so what this beer is, it's like a spin on a New England session ale, but with like nice little tweaks. And that one was one that, again, with it was a taproom favorite that we that ended up in cans due to the pandemic, and now it's one of our top sellers. So
awesome. And where can our listeners find the beer for themselves? I know you are available obviously in the tap room, but are there places online that they can purchase?
Online, I mean, we have a couple options. I mean, we have our online store. So if you just go to our main page, you'd find there's a thing where it says cans available for delivery or pickup. And then there's all things about how to do pickup or delivery orders. And we deliver to a large number of towns: Somerville, Cambridge, Arlington, Medford, Malden, Belmont, Brighton, Charlestown, I think is the list. And we're also doing pickup at the brewery, of course. And then we're available in package stores throughout Massachusetts, as well as in a little bit in Rhode Island. At least for now, that's kind of where you'd find our cans. Yeah, and there's a large number of them. And because of the limited quantity that we have right now, I can't guarantee what stores it will be available in at any given time. But hopefully with the addition of the Everett space and more beer, we'll be able to have a more steady supply at more locations throughout the state and throughout New England ultimately.
Awesome. And where can our listeners find you online on social media? And what's your website's name so it's easy to find you? Sure.
So we're at aeronautbrewing.com, or you can also go to aeronaut.net, which will take you there, or aer.co. No, never mind. Don't do that. That didn't work. Aeronaut.net, aeronautbrewing.com. That's where you'd find us. And then our Twitter handle and our Instagram handle, I believe, are both at Aeronaut Brewing, and Facebook, Aeronaut Brewing. So that's how you find us.
Great, and we'll link that all in the description so it's easy and people can just go ahead and click through. We appreciated having you guys on today. Thanks for taking the time to come talk to us. We're excited to get into these beers and try them out, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. Cheers.
No problem.
Awesome.
Great talking to you.
Cheers. Thank you.
Be sure to follow us on social at Uncorked Corner and on the blog at uncorkedcorner.com for a taste of more food and beverage content.
And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave a comment, subscribe, rate, and review on whatever podcast platform you prefer. Thanks for listening.